G'day ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, this is Rich, your narrator, and just before this episode begins, I'd like to first of all wish you all a happy Halloween and say thank you for being such a great community. And because you're so awesome in that you give us your time and your patience in watching our channel, as you know, we like to give something back every now and then. Do you remember a couple of years ago when we did the graphic novella competition, where the winner had a 10-page graphic novella produced to their brief? Well, it's back. But this time, the prize winner gets not 10, but 15 pages. Meaning our artist will draw whatever story you want to tell across 15 pages, each containing between 6 and 7 panels. And as each page costs around £150 to produce, this is easily the most expensive giveaway we've ever done, and your chance to win lies in this very episode. The 80s is collectively the Bedtime Stories team's favourite era for film, and throughout the artwork of tonight's spooky tales, we have hidden multiple characters from 80s movies. I'm not going to tell you how many there are. What I will say is there are more than 10, but less than 20, and some of them are very difficult to spot. To be in with a chance of winning, send an email to bedtime.stories@outlook.com, listing all the characters you can find and telling us whereabouts you saw them in the episode. If you get them all, we'll email you back with details for the second round. Happy hunting, and once again, happy Halloween. Hope you enjoy the episode. In the remote northern parts of the United States and Canada, whispers speak of an ancient presence that stalks the forests. Native tribes say it has always been there, a malevolent, cannibalistic beast with an insatiable desire for human flesh. But more recent accounts suggest that this entity's influence might extend beyond the wilderness. Is it possible that even urban areas are no longer safe from the shadow of the Wendigo? Most reported sightings of the Wendigo are concentrated in the far northern regions of America, particularly along the rugged, shadowy forests near the Canadian border. It is here, within the ancient histories of the native tribes who first inhabited the area, that the oldest accounts of this malevolent force are found. These tales speak of men driven mad by evil spirits, performing dark rituals that transform them into monstrous beings, cursed to haunt the very communities they once called home. As the legend of this cannibalistic creature spread beyond its origins, so too did the reports of encounters. Across the United States, news outlets and social media sites are rife with accounts of creatures resembling ape men and dog men. But even more chilling are the stories of pale, emaciated figures that lurk in the woods at the edges of our towns. These nocturnal intruders with glowing eyes and the terrifying ability to invade the minds of those they encounter are said to mimic the voices of loved ones. Those who survive often feel they've narrowly escaped a fate worse than death. It's possible that these creatures are responsible for countless killings, hinted at by the numerous missing persons reports documented throughout rural America. In the summer of 2019, Bradley Clark, a former United States Marine, found himself searching for work. During this time, he decided to reconnect with some old friends, one of whom was Jacob, who had recently moved to a remote community in northern Alabama near the Tennessee border. As he had some free time on his hands, Bradley accepted Jacob's invitation to spend a long weekend together. During the visit, the two friends decided to go hunting, Wanting to play it safe, they chose to stay close to Jacob's home. The day passed uneventfully, and as dusk began to settle in, they agreed it was time to head back. Walking the trail towards Jacob's truck, a rising commotion deeper in the woods caught their attention. Instinctively, they raised their weapons, ready for whatever might be approaching. Whether it was predator or prey, they did not know. After a tense moment of silence, a pack of coyotes suddenly bolted from the trees. Though rare, coyote attacks can be dangerous, so Jacob and Bradley remained on their guard. But to their surprise, the coyotes didn't even acknowledge their presence, instead racing across the trail and disappearing into the woods on the other side. Just as they were beginning to relax, another sound became apparent. It was heavier, more deliberate, like something large was moving through the brush. The forest had grown eerily quiet, as if nature itself was holding its breath. Then, with a deafening crash, a massive pine tree toppled onto the path in front of them. For a moment, everything was still again. Bradley and Jacob exchanged uneasy glances, unsure of what to do next. Then, from the direction of the fallen tree, they heard a voice. A voice they both recognized. It was Jacob's teenage sister, Olivia. Her cries were urgent, filled with desperation as she called out for help. Without hesitation, Bradley began to move towards the sound, but Jacob stopped him with a firm grip, whispering in a terrified voice, "How could Olivia possibly be here?" She had no idea where they were, nor any means of getting to the woods. Yet the cries persisted, pleading for rescue. Olivia now claimed she was trapped behind the fallen tree. Despite the growing unease gnawing at them, the men remained frozen in place, a nagging sense that something was terribly wrong keeping them from acting. Then, as abruptly as it began, the voice cut off. What then emerged from behind the tree made their blood run cold. A grotesque figure loomed over the trail, standing at least 9 feet tall. Its gaunt skeletal frame was draped in deathly pale skin, stretched tight over its bones. Its eyes glowed an eerie blue, devoid of pupils or irises, and it stared at the two hunters with an intense, malevolent rage. Bradley instinctively raised his rifle, but Jacob yanked him back, urging him to run towards the truck instead. They sprinted through the thick forest, glancing back repeatedly to see if the creature was following, but the dense trees obscured their view. Only when they were safely in their vehicle speeding down the road did Bradley muster the courage to ask what they had encountered. Still shaken, Jacob confessed that he didn't know for sure, but he had heard disturbing stories from family and friends. According to these tales, bullets were useless against such creatures, which was why he had insisted they run. He added that many local hunters had simply vanished without trace, their belongings later found abandoned deep in the woods. Neither man spoke of the encounter again, though Jacob wasted no time calling for his sister as soon as they got home. To his immense relief, Olivia was safe. She hadn't even left home all day. Tennessee might seem too far south for a creature typically linked to the US-Canadian border. Yet this aligns with a growing number of reports suggesting the Wendigo phenomenon is no longer confined to the remote north. if it ever was. In the autumn of 2015, Adam Reed, a Houston-based police officer, agreed to give his friend Luke a ride home at the end of a night shift. The two lived on neighbouring farms in a small town and often car-shared when heading into the city for social outings. After a quick call home to ensure his kids were asleep, Adam drove to the bar district to pick up Luke. The drive started off as usual, with the two chatting about their shifts that evening, families, and weekend plans. But as Adam turned off the highway and onto the drive leading to Luke's property, something unusual caught his eye near a fire pit, which Luke had dug. Though Adam knew the pit was several feet deep, he could see two lights glowing from inside it, like a pair of torches staring back at him. Puzzled, Adam stopped the car about 40 yards away. Both men sat and watched the strange lights, trying to figure out what they were looking at. Then, in eerie unison, they blinked out and reappeared, just like a pair of eyes. Assuming they were trespassers on Luke's land, the men decided to investigate. Adam reached for the handgun he always carried with him and cautiously began to approach the pit, whilst Luke ran into his house to retrieve a rifle. As a police officer, Adam was no stranger to tense situations, so he moved slowly, using the truck's lights to scan the area for any sign of intruders. But when he reached the edge of the pit, it was empty. Just then, he heard footsteps behind him. At first, he assumed it was Luke returning, but the footfalls were far too heavy. Suddenly, a gunshot rang out. Adam whirled around to see Luke standing on his porch, rifle raised, with a look of sheer terror etched upon his face. Following his colleague's gaze, Adam spotted a tall, thin figure fleeing towards the woods. He estimated it to be at least 8 feet tall, with grotesquely long arms and legs. Its skin was a ghostly white, stark against the blackness of the night. As it reached the tree line, the figure paused and turned to look back, its eyes glowing the same eerie light that Adam and Luke had seen earlier. Without hesitation, they both opened fire, but the creature simply turned and disappeared into the trees. Determined to track it down, the men grabbed torches from Luke's house and gave chase. For over 20 minutes, they scoured the woods, desperately searching for any sign that they had hit their target. Just as they were about to give up, they heard a rustling overhead. Looking up, Luke saw the glowing eyes staring back from a branch more than 15 feet above them. A blood-curdling roar echoed through the forest as the creature vanished once again. Despite their fear, the two men continued searching, firing at shadows and sounds. They heard heavy footsteps and saw leaves rustling, but the creature seemed to vanish into the night. Eventually, it disappeared entirely. The next morning, Adam returned to Luke's property and together they ventured into the woods, hoping to find any clues which might explain what they had encountered. They found areas where the undergrowth had been trampled by something large moving at speed, and strange triangular impressions pressed into the soft ground. Neither Adam nor Luke, both experienced outdoorsmen, could explain what they had seen or shot at that night. The natives of North America are divided over the true nature of Wendigos. In some instances, they are completely physical creatures equipped with mystical powers. In others, they are demons or spirits, drawing upon dark energy from the netherworld in order to ensnare their victims. While some cultures believe Wendigos are capable of shape-shifting, like the Skinwalker, others do not. Late in the winter of 2010, a businessman by the name of Robert Garvey arrived back in his native Canada to reconnect with his family. Having not seen each other for a while, Robert's father and older brother James were keen to make up for lost time. They invited him to go hunting with them in the woods to the north of their home. Whilst he had never really embraced his rural upbringing, Robert agreed to go with them. His brother lent him the appropriate gear, and the next day, the trio spent most of their time trekking north along the winding bends and rapids of the river. As the sun began to set, the party decided to make camp near the water's edge. It had been dark for several hours when Robert felt the call of nature and headed down to the river to relieve himself. Shortly after he had begun his business, the office worker began to notice a putrid odour emanating from the bushes a few feet away. After he had finished, Robert took out his torch and shone the beam in the direction of where the scent seemed to be coming from. To his shock, his older brother emerged from behind the bushes, smiling and holding out a hand towards him. Relieved, Robert asked James why he had snuck up on him and what the horrific smell was, thinking his brother had detected it too and had gone off to investigate. However, rather than reply, his brother simply stared at him intently, sporting the same tight smile on his face. As the seconds ticked by, Robert noticed his sibling's expression begin to change in a way that he couldn't quite explain, but that he found extremely disturbing. Then he looked at his brother's clothes. They had begun to sag, as if they were too big for him. As his eyes returned to James's face, he noticed that his skin had begun to sag as well, as if he were a wax figure melting under high heat. Petrified, he could only stand and watch as his brother's hunting clothes and skin dropped off his body and onto the ground. What was left standing there in James's place was something else entirely. A tall, emaciated, and altogether inhuman figure. Where its eyes should have been, there were two dark hollows, and a mouth which projected forwards from the rest of its face, much like an animal's snout. With a scream, Robert turned to run back towards the campfire, only to feel a sharp pain in his left leg as something grabbed hold of it and pulled him to the ground. Frantic, he kicked his legs wildly and rolled onto his back, looking for anything he could use to fend off the creature. Suddenly there was a deafening crack and a burst of light. Robert felt the grip on his leg loosen, and as he sat up, he realized that the creature was gone. Not too far away stood his father, still holding his rifle. For good measure, his father fired another shot into the darkness before dragging his son back to the camp, where James was standing alert, wondering what on earth all the commotion was. Breathlessly, Robert tried to explain what he'd seen, but found himself growing angrier as his brother began to mock him. Finally, their father intervened. He too had seen the attacker. He then pointed his torch down at Robert's leg, revealing a deep laceration. Whatever had caused the wound had passed right through the clothing and pierced his skin. Without so much as a word, the men dressed the wound before abandoning the camp altogether, beginning the long hike back home through the darkness. The Wendigo legend belongs in amongst a unique category of paranormal phenomena, in that there are centuries of stories all describing the same or at least similar things. Stories across cultures and languages, from the first Europeans to native tribes who lived thousands of miles apart. Though the majority of the sightings take place in the deep woods, more recent encounters have taken place in, or at least near, populated areas. Another outlier is the lack of any good explanation. People often explain away cryptid sightings which occur in the woods as mistaken identity. Bigfoot can be explained away as a grizzly bear walking on its hind legs, whilst a supposed alien might just be a great horned owl with its eyes glowing in the moonlight. Not only do Wendigo encounters typically involve experienced outdoorsmen and hunters, but the powers demonstrated by the creature are completely supernatural. As reported in the case of Bradley Clark and his friend Jacob, the Wendigo was able to somehow mimic the voice of Jacob's sister. In Adam and Luke's experience, the creature had eyes that shone so brightly that an experienced police officer confused them for flashlights. In Robert's case, the beast allegedly shapeshifted into his brother in order to lure him in. Outside of a paranormal being, no other animal could possibly possess these abilities. Skeptics blame alcohol or accidental ingestion of magic mushrooms for the Wendigo phenomenon. Though this could explain why sightings have persisted for so long, it does not account for so many people reporting the exact same type of creature, despite hundreds of years and thousands of miles existing between some sightings. True believers feel that the answer is simple. There is and always has been something in the woods. To them, the reason why so many of the first peoples spoke about the Wendigo for so long is because it's really there. Whether it's a physical creature or a spectral entity remains to be seen, but it seems most likely that people are seeing something they can't explain. It is clear from these stories and others that have been circulated online in recent times that there may be more dangers lurking in America's rural areas than previously believed. In recent years, reports of inexplicable creatures, shapeshifters and skinwalkers which can be tied to Native American legends have only increased. Meanwhile, remote parts of both the US and Canada boast some of the highest rates of missing persons in the world. Think of that, what you will. Is there something supernatural out there, driven to feed off humans? And if it is a Wendigo, can it ever be satiated? Story.